All right, now. Hey, thank you so much for coming out here, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about the deep connections between Old English literature and Old Norse literature. The English and the Norse, I mean, there are a lot of really profound, deep connections there. So we're going to be able to dive into all that, see, what are the similarities between these peoples, the way they thought about the ancient world that they experienced, the values that they had, and what are the connections that they have to, their literature and how we read that today. So, just to start us off, we've got Nathan Hood here, we've got Fiona here hanging out in the stream. I just want to say thank you again before we get going to Nathan for contributing his thoughts and his time to the video we put out about Batman. I mean, Batman might seem a little bit off topic for the channel, but through that topic, we were able to just dive deep into, English history and culture, how that kind of has spread to America and gotten into American culture. And we were able to kind of get into some pretty good stories. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out for sure. But I think, the one story that jumps out most to mind when talking about this genre of literature, let's say, which was written down first in Old English, is the story of Beowulf. So, yeah, what do you guys think about, just to start off, the character of Beowulf? I mean, you have this figure who is, I guess, is he a Geet? Is he a Yeat? We've heard it pronounced different ways, so we were trying to figure out before the stream, is there actually an official way to pronounce it? Um, but yeah, what do you guys make of this character? I mean, he emerges in modern day Southwest Sweden, travels to Denmark, and that's where the story begins.
Yeah, I'm supposed to start. So my take on Beowulf. Yes, Beowulf is so. I would argue that Beowulf is. It's not from Snorri, I think. So it's like from an old Saxon poem, but there are, I think, like parallels between Beowulf, for example, and the saga of Icelandic sagas. So I would the first thing that comes to mind is the saga of Hrolfur Kraki, and Beowulf is, for example, much older, I think, than many of the sagas in Icelandic, but there are like parallels between, for example, Hrolfur saga is the saga of King Hrolfur, which is he became the king of Denmark, and there are like parallel characters in Beowulf and in this saga, for example, and one of them, they're like reoccurring in some other sagas as well. So if you know, like Hrolf saga, it's about basically, this hero that's kind of like Beowulf, and this Hrolfur guy, he becomes king, and they face off into. I'm not going to go into like exactly what it's. Probably knows what it's about, but they face off between, like, there are numerous versions, I think, but then they fight a dragon in the end, exactly like in Beowulf. So, and then it goes into the origin of these characters. So there's like a speculative, like scholarly speculation that the hero in this Icelandic version is called Böðvar Bjarki. So he is this hero that is also like reoccurring, and Beowulf is very kind of similar to Beowulf. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about Beowulf,
I'm
just kind of having these archetypal similarities. I mean, if you were to go to kind of more modern storytelling, you get this sort of semi-berserker, unstoppable warrior who's just like fighting with his bare hands and like beating the crap out of this giant Grendel. And what immediately strikes to mind, and this is a super like surface level kind of examination, but what I immediately think of when I see that are two modern characters, which is one Doom guy, who's just basically this relentless force of nature, just beating up these like creatures from hell. And it, of course, you know, in the story of Beowulf, Grendel and these other creatures are, you know, they're cursed from, you know, going back to basically like the time of Genesis, and these are like these monsters that were these like Nephilim type creatures that were cursed. And then the other character that he reminds me of just right off the bat is, you know, Geralt, the Witcher. You know, you have this guy who goes from town to town and slays their monsters, and is just this like beefy guy who goes around, you know, doing the stuff that the townsfolk can't do. And that also is kind of similar to like a Western idea of you have the kind of the lone man who goes around. But the difference with Beowulf that you kind of see in like The Witcher is that it's just this guy who is there to just solve it with pure force of, not just force of arms, but just like bare fists. Like he'll just go in and just solve it through brute strength.
Yeah, I'm not like sure. Like Böðvar's archetype, at least in one story, he's presented is this like ideal, you know, dude. You know, it's like well presented. He's tall, blonde, and he's a good reputation, and he's like really strong. So, and he also needs like a, you know, a band of dudes to back him up. You know, it's not exactly like this lone archetype, lone guy that kills everybody. It's like not as much of a thing in Scandinavian mythologies, at least the Icelandic ones. You usually have like these blood feuds and a band of guys versus another band, you know.
Well, I think we can connect that with The Wanderer, which is the other poem that you would kind of set us for this Matt. Because the Wanderer, that's a name that's given to it. It's never actually got a title from the Exeter book, which it's recorded in. And some, such as J.R.R. Tolkien, have said it should be renamed The Exile. Because the character in it is somebody who is a wanderer. He has lost his kin. He has lost his lord. He has no family. He has no grounding, as it were. And this world that he exists in then is one of loneliness, of a waste with no meaning and no hope. That everything that he held dear and good, the drinking in the feast hall, the serving his lord, clasping him by the knees, that's all gone. Whereas Beowulf, he is the, as you've been saying, the archetype or the ideal of this culture. And so he's somebody who is situated within various relationships. He's a thane of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Hygelac or Hygelac, or how would I say that, Fjolnir?
Sorry, what?
Hygelac?
Hygelac. What does that mean?
So he is the king of the Geats before Beowulf.
I think Hygelac, I think is how I've heard it said.
Is it no? Are you talking about a king, or is
it's
that
the name of the king? It's the name of the king.
Hygelac, no.
Well,
we'll go with Hygelac. We'll go with Hygelac, which is how the Higelac, I believe.
Okay, Hygelac. Well, he's a thane of his, so he's got that relationship, and then he goes off to get glory, essentially, at Hrothgar's hall against Grendel, and he thus becomes an ally of his with his own band and receives gifts from him. So there's this pattern of he's not an he is going somewhere else to get glory. So he is moving away from home, but it's within a network of loyalty relationships. And when he returns home, he is rewarded by Higelac with his own land and his own people to rule. And in time, he becomes the ruler himself. So I think that's an interesting connection there with the Norse ideal, as I understand it. That Beowulf seems to be the ideal young man at the beginning, working his way up the system.
Yeah. But my point was that Hrolf Kraka and Beowulf, it's arguably basically the same story because it happens in the same place, probably at the same time, just told, changed maybe through traditions, different tellings and whatnot. But you have the same characters and very similar events. In Hrolf Kraka, they fight a dragon at the end, I think. I'm not sure. I don't think Grendel, this Grendel character is not occurring in that saga. But you also have like this weird stuff. For example, Hrolf's sister she's half elven. His half sister, that is. And comparing like his archetype and his hero, Böðvar Bjarki. Böðvar means like, Bjarki means bear. So it's like another like reference to this, berserker stuff. And his origin story is that he had his father was a king. His father was a king. Can't remember exactly where. It's so hard to memorize all this stuff, but we learned all this stuff in high school. So his father was a king, and he married some woman. She died, and then she married a Sami witch, the king, after Böðvar was born. And and when he grew older, he grew up this, up as this Chad dude, like big and strong. And his stepmother tried to seduce him, the Sami woman. And he refuses, because it's like fucked up, So she put a spell on him, and so that he will turn into a bear every night. That's like one telling of it.
Well, there's a good connection here in terms of Beowulf in the Old English means wolf of the bees. Now, what eats honey, right? A bear. So again, you've got the same name going on here. The berserker connection once more.
I would say his character resembles the most, like he is like Beorn from The Hobbit. He's obviously that character is based on this archetype, like the shapeshifter. He was originally a shapeshifter in the saga. So and they also King Hrolfr also fights off which is rumored to be Hrothgar's cousin. So he fights off Odin disguised Odin, in one scene. So that's another thing.
So I have a question for you guys then. Seeing as the events of Beowulf take place in Denmark, and Beowulf is a Geat, he's from Sweden. How then, it's interesting that the first written account of Beowulf we have is from an English source. And again, when you get to the migrations of the Anglo Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons are from modern day northern Germany and southern Denmark. So was this a process of this story being brought in as they migrated? Is this something that could have been passed on just through, bards sort of telling the story? Or what is kind of the reason why we have the English version and we don't actually have like an Old Norse. We don't have a Danish version of this directly. I mean, you did say Fjolnir. I mean, there is the sort of saga retelling with its own very, very reminiscent story, but it is English. It is interesting that the English seem to have this, when they're thinking about Beowulf and they're thinking about the events that took place in Denmark, they're saying, "Oh no, that's us. That's not like the Danes' history, although it is too." They're like, "Oh, that's just as much our own history and our own past, even though it didn't take place, on the Isle of Britain."
Well, so I would argue that the Saxons, like the Isles, have obviously they wrote their stuff down earlier, like much earlier. Indisputably so, because they had like monasteries and much earlier than we did, stuff like that. But we knew these stories. We obviously told these stories and kept them alive orally, and then wrote it down. I think the earliest manuscripts are known to exist in Iceland in a monastery in 1461. It's called the Mörðuvellir. It's a monastery here in Iceland. These manuscripts were not found, but the first one, actual manuscript, was from the 17th century, but they are known to have existed from the actual skin manuscript from 1461. So, but we know these stories are much older.
I'm just reading Green River's comment.
Yeah.
Nathan, how do you respond? How do you respond to this accusation?
I've had it many times. Yes, I think so. I totally agree with the what Fjolnir said about the history of writing and kind of manuscript production tied to the Christian context. The thing I would add to it as well, and I'm really drawing here on Tom Shippey's book "Laughing Shall I Die," which really goes into the Viking mindset, as he would describe it. And he has a chapter upon a character we've already mentioned, Higelac, and the history of the Geats. And
Higelac, is it like a? That's where the name from, like Oblivion, like Chicalac.
Oh, okay.
It's Elder Scrolls, like a.
Well, and Skyrim takes Hrothgar. You have High Hrothgar, which is obviously named after King Hrothgar.
See that American stealing Danish history as well. But I think one of the things he points out is if you look at the kind of stories we have of that period. So of Higelac, for example, he gets killed, and that's in Beowulf, but there's other accounts of it. He's killed by the Franks, and this leads to eventually the destruction of the royal family of the Geats. And this is kind of hinted at the end of Beowulf, that with Beowulf's death, there's going to be more bloodshed, there's going to be more war, and this is inevitable. There was a few other tribes during that period who seemed to face a similar fate. Shippey mentions the Bards, he says as well. And he says of one of the Danish royal families too. And so these groups then, when they come to England, they're not coming as victors in Scandinavia. They are groups who have been defeated, finding a new homeland. And I think when you look at the story of Beowulf, and I'm sure we'll get into this, and the same with The Wanderer as well in its own way, these are poems which reflect a sense of deep loss and impending defeat, or living after a defeat. And so I think that's one reason why, regardless of the written side of things, why this might be an important poem for this people, why it captures something of their mindset, because they are a defeated people already when they arrive at these shores. And they are not, they're trying to kind of remember something of that history of themselves.
So it's a code, basically.
You could say it's a code, but it's also a lament as well of what's happened. And I think I wonder if, well, this is something I wanted to actually ask, and maybe it'll come through more in the stream, but this sense of having already lost. I know there's this sense with the idea of Ragnarok, that the gods will be defeated, but it's not happened yet. But with this sort of story, the defeat's already happened. Beowulf's died, and the Geats have had to leave their homeland and come to England. So is that a difference, perhaps, between the two mythologies or kind of poetic outputs?
Well,
it's
what's
interesting. Go ahead, Fjolnir.
Yeah, I would say in Hrolf Saga, I think the hero also dies. Börberki also dies, and they also have these like grim endings in the Icelandic versions. And these like I think every single hero dies in all of the sagas. I can't think of a saga where the main character lives, to be honest. So and he loses or he something goes wrong, some catastrophe or his his clan gets destroyed. So if you're gonna if this is a lament of a defeated Geats, then how do you explain like why are they so similar to the Icelandic like ones? Like
I think I agree with you that death is a constant theme across both, and I think that's actually one of the key connectors here. And if you tie it in with this belief that the gods will be overthrown at Ragnarok, then there's that goes across both. I think what I'm trying to get at though as well is that there's also a sense that the death of a hero here leads to the destruction of the people, and in its entirety. And that seems to be, when you read The Wanderer, it is about a man who's lost his people, or maybe his people have been conquered and defeated. And I don't necessarily get that impression from my very small reading of Norse mythology that it has quite the same tone. Actually, when it comes to death, it's actually like, so Ragnar Hairy Breeches is laughing when he dies, right? So and that's the kind of spirit that I see there of defiance and maybe a bit of humor. I don't get that from Beowulf. Now maybe I've only read a small selection, so that's why I wanted to kind of ask about that. Is there am I only seeing one side with Ragnar Hairy Breeches, or is that the tone?
Yeah, I would actually agree. That's pretty much the tone, like this laconic attitude towards mortality, and I would like argue that the tone of the sagas themselves are it's actually remarkable. That the tone is not like this Wagner tone. You understand, like this mythical, Wagnerian atmosphere. It's much more, I would say, the most comparable. Like if you want to capture the feel of the sagas and the feel of the tone and the atmosphere, I think in contemporary culture, the closest thing are actually spaghetti westerns. Like I'm not kidding, because you have the same like the Clint Eastwood ones, because you have the lines, for example, between like what is natural and supernatural. Like you don't know if something is supernatural or natural. Like the lines are kind of blurred, Like there's this Clint Eastwood movie, like he supposedly rises from the grave to take revenge on some village, but did he survive? Like you don't know, like stuff like that. Is he a ghost or isn't he? It's like a very Norse concept, like you don't know if something is truly, like the author asks you a question, like is it it cannot be, you're left to speculate basically. But you have like also in Grettir Saga you have like a literal ghost, and these like supernatural occurrence, but they don't. But they seem to just be a part of the natural world, you know. And you have these like blood feuds, and you have revenge, and you have like everybody dies, and it can get a bit funny sometimes, you know. So that's a kind of, for example, there's a story in Iceland called The Outlaw. Have you heard about it? It's like a saga, the Gísla Súrsson, Saga of Gísla Súrsson. Have you heard about it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, okay. It's basically, you know, his saga. You can't just basically take his saga and transfer it to put cowboy hats on, and you know, transfer it into the Wild West, basically, because it's because it's the same. You know, he starts out. His family's his brother-in-law, like there's two brothers, and they both each have a brother-in-law, and they don't get along because they don't see each other as family. So I think Gísli kills one of them. No, he refuses like allegiance to one of them, and then he kills his brother, or supposedly kills him, and he kills him, and then Gísli is like declared an outlaw. So he has to flee to another part of the country because he killed this dude who was like a high-ranking, like a really high-profile friend of a Goði. So, and he gathers a group of guys to murder him, and like pays off and offers like silver coins and stuff to hunt him down, and they have like a last stand on some like a really small island, on some spot. Like I actually been there, you know, this place in Iceland. Like you have all this descriptive landmark that you can actually check out. So,
and what is that experience like, Fielder, of, you know, being able to stand in the place where it's like, wow, you know, this happened 800 years ago, where
I can't remember. I think the place where the last stand in the Outlaw was, it was like this really high rising island. I think it was either the Outlaw or the Grettir Saga. I can't remember exactly which, but there was this last stand, this island. There was like a natural fortress. It rose like really high from the sea, so we could just camp there for days. And I was there when the guy made the last stand, and it's like a half a minute drive from here. So I've seen it like many times, and it's in Hvalfjörður. It's not far from here. Wow. So
that's extraordinary.
Yeah, I can take pictures and send it to you if you like.
Yeah, no, that'd be really cool. I can post them in the community feed.
Yeah, so anyway, you get the story. It's this story, and then he dies obviously at the end, and his wife, his ex-wife, Gísli's ex-wife, is forcibly wed to a friend of this antagonist, and he tries to kill him, the antagonist, after Gísli died as a revenge. So which is like, because she's still loyal to her first husband, apparently, you know, so like a twist, and then she flees the country and becomes Christian. Basically, that's her fate. So, but this kind of a story, this is basically a Western plot, you know, if you know what I mean. Like,
oh yeah.
So you don't have anything supernatural in this story, I think. Not much. So.
And the Westerns, the interesting thing about the Westerns is that those are, you know, I mean, a lot of those are stories, or it's like films, you know, written long after the fact, but based on stories of events that happened with, you know, by and large Englishmen on the continent who had traveled to America, and then they're reenacting these very ancient patterns of being and acting in the world, and going on these adventures, albeit instead of taking place in Iceland or Denmark or Sweden or England, they're living out these same patterns just in the Wild West.
Yeah, somebody said spaghetti westerns have an element of low magic. Yeah, that's exactly what the Icelandic sagas are. It's like low magic, low supernatural, but the supernatural is still there in the late ones, in the purely the ones that happen only in Iceland, not, for example, in the one that is comparable to Beowulf, because you have like dragons and you have these literal dragons and literal like Grendel, like supernatural entities. But in other sagas, you have this very, very, very comparable to the movie High Plains Drifter, for example. Like he is either a ghost, he's probably a ghost, or he is not a ghost, and he's taking revenge on the village. It's one of my favorite movies, by the way. So. Yeah,
no, that's
it's a good movie, and I wonder if because what you're saying, Matt, was really interesting about the kind of imitation of these kinds of lives and the repetition of them, I guess, through different points in history. And I wonder if the thing about the Wild West is at that time it was probably one of the few places in the Western world on the boundaries of the unknown. Like you're still within human society, but you've got the vast expanse. You can go and like make your own life, make your own farmstead, go and be like a gang leader if you can make it. And in such a world where
there's also in Iceland in the settlement, these stories happened in the early, either in the early settlement period or in the like what we call Þjóðveldisöld, or the supposed golden period in Iceland, where it was shortly after the settlement, but the population was expanding and everything was growing, like the spring period of Iceland, So, and everything was like new, and we were separated from Norway and stuff like that. So.
And that connects too. I mean, one of the things that's kind of often missed when looking at the English, because we think of the English as kind of, we have this idea of kind of the pastoral, settled, or agriculture, just kind of being comfy and cozy in England. But there is this both in the early days of the Anglo Saxons where they were traveling by sea. They were, I mean, very much like the Vikings. They're on the seaborne travel where they're carving out, they're kind of going through the frontier on going out to kind of the edge of the known world in their knowledge of the world. And then you have again the English tradition of being seafarers when they had their empire again. You go 1,000 years later and they're retelling that pattern. But I mean, both that kind of connects to another commonality between the Norse and the English, is that you see, even going way far back, the sort of Faustian need to explore and discover new lands.
The Norwegians are always trying to like lay claim to the Faustian exploration of America, while technically they were Icelanders. They had settled Iceland, and so they had become Icelandic, even though it's like they'd lived here for like 10 years. They were technically new ethnos, so they were Icelandic, not Norwegians.
Well, to what extent, and that's kind of another question, to what extent do you think Iceland is a distinct ethnos from the Norwegians? I mean, they certainly share an enormous amount of blood and history. Linguistically, they've developed quite differently, and you've had the Danish ownership of Norway even more so. So, I mean, do you think that has the sort of linguistic changes? And, we've kind of discussed, to what extent is some of the research into, say, like Irish migration to England, to what extent is that actually true? Is that kind of not accurate? But do you think the Icelanders are different enough to constitute a distinct ethnos from the Norwegians?
No, the short answer is no, basically. I think we are just a Norwegian colony, but the best way to describe us would be we are like this place which has like a kind of a port in Scandinavia. There is like a portal to the past, and there are more so than other places in Norway. A good counterexample would be like Alvadalen in Sweden. They still used like runes up until, I don't know, 100 years ago. Like he had these old customs up until very, very recently. And the same is true with Icelanders. Like we were indistinguishable from Norwegians for the vast majority of our history, except for we didn't have the bastardized language, you know. So that's my take on it. As for the Irish influence, you have like there's currently like a resurgence of this fad, you know, we are like part Celtic. I think it's complete bullshit because there's no evidence for it. They're like saying according to genetic, like 60% of the women were Celtic. Like there's no way in hell, because if they would, you would have mentions in the sagas of this, which is not mentioned. Like these are all Norwegians, and these are all women of Norwegian descent, and everybody in the sagas is Norwegian. And we literally had, in the year 1000, every single birth was recorded in Iceland by the monasteries. Because after Christianization, like I think the Iceland was in the 900, and first colonist arrived 930 or something, 900 in the early to mid 900s, and we became officially Christian in the year 1000. And after that, the priest decided to, because of baptism, we decided to record every birth, because of everybody had to be baptized. And this tradition kept going on after that, because it's easy for such a small population. And since so little time had elapsed after the settlement and then after Christianization, everybody pretty much knew, like it was not difficult to track lineages. Like, okay, this was your father, this was your father's father, I'm going to register everybody, you know, and the priest did all of that. And these were all Norwegians, like most of them. There was one case of a Celtic woman, I think called Melkorka Myrkjaldardóttir or something. It was like supposedly a Celtic slave, but you know, this was because this was like an outlier, like this was unusual. And it is
so they noted it because they're like, oh, this is not the norm.
And also I have asked archaeologists about this. I have asked like Norwegian archaeologists about this, like, and they say this is like there's no evidence, there's no changes in the material culture. If we would see such an enormous Celtic influence, you would have seen difference, like a huge difference in the material culture compared to that of Norway. We don't, like we have the turf houses, you know, which is Norwegians don't have, but that is because there was no wood here. And like I think the Faroe Islands also have these similar turf houses, so it's like Scandinavians knew how to build these things, and the structure of the houses and the runes, the ironwork, like nothing of the early mud is Celtic. So and the language, like the only argument remaining is like some Icelandic words may have Celtic origins, but that is also refutable because these Celtic origins supposedly may have Scandinavian origins also, you know. So it's not the way, not Celtic words that influenced us, but the reverse. You know, we influenced Celtic, the Gaelic tongue, and also regarding the genetic evidence. Like there is obviously like common ancestry between us and the modern Irish. That has been proven, but I think it's obvious why that is because Scandinavians unloaded their stuff into Ireland. It's like the other way around. We literally had colonies in Ireland, and they have Scandinavian DNA. It's the other way. They have it backwards, basically. So you have Irishmen who have a high amount of Scandinavian DNA, but we might have some Celtic DNA, but we don't have that much, I think. So that's where they have the origin. That's my take. I hate this theory. It's so annoying. And if you also look at like Celts, by the way, I have nothing against Celts. They're like fine stock of people, very, very robust and
glad to hear it.
Fine looking people, but I'm just saying like this is not true. So like typical like guys like Keith Woods, for example, and like a prime minister of Ireland, you know, people here don't look like this. I have never seen an Icelander like that here. Especially when they get like older, like the Prime Minister of Ireland, he's maybe in a like extreme example, but he's kind of look like, a bit like hobbits, you know. But you don't see that look here. Basically, that's the thing. Like, there's no fucking way we are Celtic, you know. I'm sorry. So, yeah, that's.
And are the Scots considered Celts? I'm not. I don't know the classification for Scots.
Well, the Scots. There's a number of. I guess there's a number of tribes.
There's a little Norwegian admixture, is there not? Especially once you get to the north of Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 1% Norse DNA in me, so you know.
Heck yeah, Norse bro, let's go.
I'm a product of the colonies, but I think you've got the Picts and the Scots who would be similar in culture group to the Celts, but they're not the same. But they're part of that. But then the Scots themselves come from Ireland as a tribe, so you again get Norse influence through that too, as well, beyond just the Norwegians who landed in Scotland.
And also just to finish my rant, like this Celtic thing in the historical context. If you're like Norwegians fleeing a settlement, we know, for example, they had this huge ship called Knurr, which they carried land and livestock, and they basically carried the whole colonies of Scandinavia from Norwegians into Iceland, and also they had this for America as well. So why the hell would they go all the way to the Celtic Isles and then back when they already had everything packed up and they brought their families, obviously? So you know, they came from Norway in these huge colonial ships and landed, and we know where they landed, and we know who the first settlers were. So yeah, that's basically, and they brought their families. They brought, you know, they were not bachelors or they didn't go raiding first. There's no account of that in the sagas, I think, like guy raiding and bringing back some waifus from Scotland or Ireland.
Although if you do want to talk about Irish settlement of other locations, I mean, one kind of crazy, I was looking at this map this week that just was blowing my mind, which is comparing the number of people in America, the population size in America of a given diaspora to the current population of its home country. And you have, you know, quite a bit throughout. You know, Germany is 50%, so there are roughly as many Germans descended from Germans in America as there are Germans in Germany. Sweden is something like 50% as well. There are about as many Swedes or Swedish descendants in America as are Swedes in Sweden. English is quite high, even higher, I think, in England. And then you go, and then, well, and you see like maybe 12% in Italy, but then you go to Ireland, and Ireland is just, you've got all these other ones like laid out here. Ireland is like way up here, it's at 620%. So there's like 6.2 times as many Irish, or, you know, there's 6.2 times as much Irish blood in America as there is in Ireland itself. It's kind of mind blowing. I don't know, man. The Irish, they were impressive.
I just to clarify, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't care less, like if this Celtic theory were true. Like, I mean, wouldn't mind having hobbit genes. Fine stock of people, like I said. But
Alice says she has curly hobbit hair and slight elf-like ears. Elf ears, is that a Celtic Irish trait? I haven't heard that one before.
I think the curly hair definitely is like but I just think it's not.
We'll have to do an ear check, you know, at the start of each stream, just make sure we don't let any Irish slip in here. No, I'm playing.
I just think it's not true. It's just like no evidence for it. It's just like the reason why it's like academics in Iceland are trying to build some unique identity for Iceland separate from Norway.
Interesting. So you think that might be the idea, is trying to kind of pull it further away from its kind of Norwegian roots? Like there's sort of this idea to create Iceland as kind of more distinct. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, it's like the same mentality that Americans like take DNA tests over and over again until they get 1% Native American, instead of just accepting who they are, basically. So
interesting. Yeah. We won't mention any politicians who like to do that.
Just on the Irish, I think you know, we've been saying they've got elf ears and you know, elf hair or whatever. Well, of course, are they not descended from the Tuath Di Danann, right? This supernatural race of fairies who ruled Ireland for many years.
I've heard about that. I heard like the elves from the Lord of the Rings actually based on them. Right.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty terrifying. Like, they weren't nice elves, right? They were you know, like the Wild Hunt. They have their equivalent, and when they were out and about, you don't go outside. So maybe the Irish are actually descended from these elves. I like that theory.
Yeah, well, I would actually put it like the elves. Okay, if you put it in Lord of the Rings context, the hobbits are like the Irish, and the elves are like Scandinavians. You look more like it's like fair and lean, and you know, kind of blonde. Basically, that's my take on it. No offense.
Well, kind of getting back to the, you know, the poem "The Wanderer." You know, there's something about that resonates with me in particular, and I wonder if this is this kind of the nature of Englishness in some sense? Is there this longing for the continent, for the days of, and this kind of ties back to the way in which European history, so much of European history is influenced by this phenomenon whereby the Scandinavians, you know, are sort of the womb of a lot of Europe. And after the Indo-Europeans migrate into Scandinavia, you get this constant outflowing, as you have, especially with Sweden. You know, you have the potential to create populations that can't be maintained by the land. So you get this constant pouring out of, you know, people of Swedish sort of Nordic stock who travel down into Germany, who travel down through Denmark, who migrate, who travel out into England, you know, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths who kind of flood out, go down into Italy, and just there's this constant kind of pouring down effect that you get with migration, because you don't really see the opposite. You don't really see significant numbers of English or French or Germans moving back up the chain, and maybe that's because it's cold up there and people don't want to go back necessarily. They're like, it's kind of cozy here. down further in the continent.
It's also
But I do wonder, like, because the English still maintain to a larger extent, you know, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, they kind of dissolved over time. They dissolved and integrated into the surrounding populations, much more so than the English. The English still maintained quite a bit of their Anglo Saxon ethnic stock. So is there that feeling in the English of this kind of longing for the continent? This is just a theory I'm kind of creating out of thin air. So I might be kind of baseless on that, but do you think there is that kind of longing?
Yeah, I think the main explanation is basically population explosion in many, like all the governmental setup in these Germanic nations, and also, as you told me once, the Sweden probably had like a population explosion because I don't know much about Swedish history, but it's my theoretical take. They had this fertile, dense, rural, agrarian, society they were much more dense than Norway, I think, and also Denmark.
I mean, they've always had way more arable land, so they've always been able to sustain significantly higher populations. And you go through Norway, and it's, I haven't been there yet myself, but just looking at a topographical map of Norway, you look and you just see these like thin stretches where you can have little bits of farmland and little villages through these.
It's only on the coast. It's only on the coastlines. And,
right, that too. That's where you get your fishing.
It's the same here. The highlands here are uninhabitable. So, and Norway, like that's the reason why most Viking raids came from, like migrations came from like the Danes and the Swedes, like mostly from the Danes, I think, into the Isles especially. Not from, like, you don't hear of many Norwegians. Like there were some even Icelanders that supposedly raided the Isles and beyond, but you didn't have like entire war bands from Iceland. If you were like a strong warrior, you went to the king, either the king of Norway or the king of Denmark, to join his war band, So and also like Iceland didn't have a king ever. So and also like the Germanic tribes are migratory. We like they move all the time throughout history. You had like during Caesar's time, like he wrote about all these Germanic tribes moving all the time, everywhere, from place to place. Always like when a land is not fertile enough, they just move to the next area. They're kind of a nomadic, at least like from the Iron Age. Iceland and Norway are like an exception, and the British Isles, by the way. The Saxons are like a huge exceptions to this Germanic semi-nomadic history, because they have remained in the same place, and you have these groups and generations in the same, like cultivating the same soil for generations, which is like kind of abnormal for people. So that's why these cultures are kind of outliers in Germanic history, basically. So that's not normal in that historical context. That's my take on it, at least.
I think just to kind of build on it and kind of return to your question about this sense of home that's missing in the Wanderer, and to an extent it's there. Well, it's very much there in Beowulf in terms of Hrolf, right? But the great hall of Hrothgar, and this place which is stunning. It's supposed to be beautiful, and warriors from miles around want to come to this hall and feast and celebrate at this great lord's feet. But then, in the darkness, there is this monster. And I think it's quite important. It's not another tribe. It's not another political group or another group of human beings. It's a monster, a son of Cain, so cursed by God, essentially, who attacks. And so there is this sense that these small points, these small refuges and homes which provide light and security are fragile, and the darkness is waiting to disrupt it. And it's more often than not, it has already been disrupted, or it's going to be disrupted. I think that's very much a feeling, and the Wanderer is almost a character who's lived post Grendel, you might say. His hall has been Grendelled. I'm going to make that a verb, Grendelled. But I think as well, so tying it in with the historical context, so you have the fact that these tribes may have themselves been losers in Scandinavia and have come to England in due course.
Yeah, but they were winners in England. If you look at like the Saxons, like and the Danes, they dominated the British Isles pretty much. They won most of the battles, and they conquered like they made kingdoms of their own, which were prosperous in, like, for example, Mercia and like all these Saxon kingdoms, which were dominant kingdoms, like over there. So,
I mean, have you seen their drip? Of course, they're dominating. We got it on the thumbnail here.
Like a Germanic way of like living. It's just like you go to someplace else and you conquer and you make a new and better kingdom than you left behind. That's like what has always happened. Like Iceland and Norway is like not leaving and just remaining in the same place forever, as long as you can. Like it's extreme isolationist. And my take is like that's abnormal in like if you compare it to other Germanic cultures. So,
well, I think there's two other things that I wanted to add in there, which is one of the key other influences is the Roman British population who live there and who do become subjects of the Anglo Saxons and integrated to a certain degree, because when you reach 409. There's the revolt against the Roman Empire, and basically because it was unable to defend the Roman British at that time from Germanic incursions and raids. And at that point, once that happens, society essentially collapses and the Saxons come in due course. So what you have then is a lot of these Saxon groups move into infrastructure, buildings, architecture, towns built by the Romans, who themselves do not have the ability to build such things. So at Chester, for example, I was there quite recently. It's a town on the Welsh border between England and Wales, and the Romans built a stone wall that went all the way around the town. Now, one of these walls collapsed, and in Saxon times, they could only replace it with a wooden palisade. They didn't have the capability or the engineering knowledge to build a stone wall. So there's this sense of which, and I think in the Wanderer there's this phrase. Let me see if I can find it. Thus the maker of men laid this world waste until the ancient works of the giants stood idle. So there's this,
and the giants, is that the Roman architecture that they're referring to?
Well, there's often been this idea that that the Roman works were referred to as those produced by giants. There's also the landscape as well, right? So you've got stories of giants throwing stones in the Irish Sea, and that creates the Isle of Man. But certainly the actual architecture and the buildings were seen as coming from a golden age, built by a superior civilization, which is gone, which has disappeared. And so these people live within those ruins and are themselves aware of thus their own mortality and the likelihood their own civilization will fall away at some point. So I think that's the second kind of sense in which,
it's like in Spenglerian terms, like a dark age, you know, in a like a ruins of a civilization in a
yeah.
But it was like a fall of Rome in Spenglerian terms, like the ruins of a Roman civilization dying, but a new, like a medieval Europe being birthed, like pre-springtime for Germanic Europe, basically. After that, you know, you had the High Middle Ages.
Yes.
It's like another golden age, basically. So yeah.
So you're living in the literal ruins of a great civilization. So I think that adds to this sense of longing for a you called it home earlier, Matt. This better society, this hero rot essentially. It doesn't exist because we're literally in ruins, and we're aware of our own precariousness here. And then finally, just sorry to bring this back round to the kind of third point. When they arrive in England, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, they're not united. They're constantly fighting each other. And during this period, what a lot of archaeology has shown is the number of hordes that are found during this period is really high. And hordes basically are built because you want to hide your wealth in case you're invaded, so nobody can find it and take it from you. So, and Beowulf has hordes throughout it, right? The monsters have the hordes, and eventually Beowulf is he is kind of cremated with a horde. So there's this sense of it's a war. It's not a place of stability or peace. It's Anglo-Saxon England is filled with warfare and constant boundary shifts. So again, it's there's maybe it's an idealistic hope for a more peaceful time that's no longer here with these sorts of poems.
Teutonic Warrior brings up a good point, and I think this kind of hits on the idea that, you know, if you're in Norway and Sweden in particular, and Iceland as well, there's much less of a record of being invaded from the outside. And I've heard the claim made, and I forget who made this claim, but there was this idea for a while floating around that the English are, you know, as sort of individualistic, if you like, they're sort of as sort of individual rights oriented as they are because they're on an island and they're protected by their geography. But I think when you look back to, you know, any time pre 1500s, I mean, you see that England really isn't this safe place, that it's not actually this safe island where people are, you know, defended naturally. It's like they're constantly getting invaded from everyone. It's this PvP zone multiplayer. You know, it's basically Rust, is what I'm saying. It's Rust, and everyone's just trying to like fight to get what little bit they can have, whether that's the Normans coming in from the south, the Norwegians coming from the north, the Picts fighting against the Anglo Saxons, who are fighting against the Danes. And, you know, it's like, it's really having to, like, the quote unquote, you know, natural defensiveness of being an island only works with Iceland because Iceland is small enough that it's like you're shooting an arrow, and it's, if you miss, you're just out into the abyss and you're just gonna like drown at sea. Whereas like England is close enough to everything else where they're able to kind of use the highway that is the sea to, you know, get the longships out and invade it and try to, or at least attempt to invade it like constantly.
There's also nothing here. Oh, basically, it's like
right, yeah, that too.
And in like these scarce, scattered part of Norway, like in the coastlines, like not like the land is like not that valuable. Like it's beautiful, like, but in early medieval context, like it's not as fertile as, you know, the land in Spain, for example, or Italy. So we'd rather invade over there than here. But I think also, like, you have no trees. You can't build a ship or a house, which is like you have to import all wood or use driftwood to build stuff from. Just like really, really unique. But
here's a question. This is totally off topic, but where does the driftwood come from? Like,
from
is that
Russia,
coming from
Russia? It comes regularly on it. It washes up very regularly on a certain shore. I think I can't remember exactly where, but it's like a regular timing. We know when it comes, and you can probably pick some off, if you want. But
That's extraordinary. Wow.
it's
No,
like
I
it's
had
like
no idea.
it's like a route of driftwood, regular from it bombards the shores here. So it comes from Russia, all the driftwood.
Wow. So you just have some Russian lumberjacks way out there just helping you guys out. Have been doing it for thousands of years.
No, it's dead from the forest. It's just dying trees from a Russian forest, I think.
That's extraordinary. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's cool.
Yeah. So I think like in because Iceland has also been a part of Norway shortly after Christianization, like even when we were like in the settlement period, quote unquote, you were still like tied to Norway, and then we became just a part of the Norwegian crown.
You guys had to be bailed out by Harold Sigurdsson when you had a famine that one time.
Yeah, and also it's like a number of disasters and famines, in all the way like until like a few hundred years ago, like killed off like vast proportion of the population. So we had like several bottlenecks, basically. Like I was actually reading up on my family history. Like my great grandfather, I think, 3 times great. He lived in the West Fjords, not like a small farm. Like he lost 7 children. Like, can you imagine that? Like losing 7 children as a parent. But that was during, I think, the outbreak of tuberculosis. So that's maybe like an outlier event. And his son lost also like 5 siblings or something. Also because of tuberculosis and I think few in accidents, like a snow flood and stuff like that. So it's like really high attrition of people here, like not that long ago. So, but you had these like I said, you had these natural disasters, and like I'm suspecting like some periods may have been different than others. Like you had maybe this nice warm period in the settlement age where it was so warm that that Greenland was habitable. There was a colony in Greenland that lasted for several hundred years. So Iceland was much more temperate back then. So maybe you had less of these horrific, like these atrocious, brutal attrition of like both newborns and even young people. So less of these bottlenecks, basically.
Yeah.
And there's like this is like theory that the Celts, like even if they were Celts, they would just like weed it out by these bottlenecks. Only the Norse genes survived, It's like it's one commentary on that. So yeah, so.
And I want to just dive a little more into sort of the tone of the Wanderer, and maybe Iceland has a bit of this experience too of kind of being off, being a colony. But when I read the Wanderer, what really grabbed me about it was this feeling of being disconnected from your folk, being disconnected from your king, disconnected from kind of this past that you had, and this experience of being in exile is a condition that is as much something you feel in modernity, just being separated from even if you do live, let's say you do live in your native land, you still have this separation from the order of the past and from the common understanding of being a part of a kingdom, being a part of a people, that has very much sort of been swept away for the time, and there is this feeling of being in a state of spiritual desolation. Christianity has been just decimated. And living in America, there is that even further step of removal beyond that, which is you're literally, for many people, you're not even around people who can share the same history, or people who are of the same tongue.
Yeah, sorry. This guy Teutonic Warrior says Iceland was a land of strong-willed people, clever in survival. As many Karlmen, freemen, went to Iceland, another land, to escape Harald Herfer. That's actually a theory. It's not confirmed that that's the reason. There may have been like many reasons for the settlement. I think that's a very possible reason why many Norwegians settled here. But I think it was mostly because of higher taxes, basically. So it can't be that we are a nation of tax dodgers, which also is a common behavior nowadays.
Man, maybe you and me, Fjolnir, being Americans, maybe we're really not so different after all.
Yeah, it's like I thought evading taxes is a national pastime over here. And also, but you
guys were more successful at it. I mean, let's be honest. If I look at my IRS work, it's I think you guys won.
We don't have an IRS or anything, like, thank God. So yeah, but it also like just been there was like this weird inheritance law, I think, in the Viking Age, where only the firstborn could inherit everything. So it might have been like second-born or third-born sons just looking to grab new land, and they heard of this land in the east, northeast of Trondheim, maybe, and moved there, like this new green land, fertile land, So that, and also like also other theory might have been like outlaws and criminals. Few of them, not all. We know that Eiríkur Rauði, or Eirik the Red, he was a criminal, an outlaw. He was sentenced. He had a death sentence in Norway, I think. He was a so-called skógargangsmaður. It's an Icelandic word. It means a wood-walking man. It means basically that you're an outlaw, but it's one of my favorite words. So it basically kind of like a mountain man, but except like you're an outlaw. So
you're a Kaczynski,
Yeah, but you're literally like you have a bounty on your head. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're a Kaczynski there.
Yeah, but Eric was kind of a scumbag, though. He, according to the Sagas, so, and he was like a heathen. But his son Leifur was he was Christian and much better behaved, and he was an explorer and accomplished explorer, very much so.
And I want to just, and kind of touching on this theme of kind of separation. I mean, is that, and we don't have to get too personal about it, but yeah, I mean, that is kind of the thing that resonates, that makes, so much of this ancient literature seem so immediate. It's like, even though it's a totally different context, there is this sense of just profound connection. I mean, the people in the writings that we have from that time, like, it's so, the descriptions are so vivid, and it's not this like, sort of weepy, kind of, how would you say? Because when you're reading it, it's not coming from this place of, just moping around, but it is that you do get the raw, genuine emotion in there, and it's, even being separated from it by over 1,000 years, it hits you just like a ton of bricks. I mean, it's right there. I mean, am I the only one who has that experience when I read that? Because that is it. The characters just, and the people in the stories just feel so immediate to me and so palpable.
They feel like they've got weight, I think, that they have a true heft to them. And I think what you're picking up on is they're not self-pitying in the least. They don't think if something bad happens, woe is me. They just get on with it and they face it with courage. I think that speaks to a couple of things. One of them is this idea that, this keeps going on throughout both the Wanderer and Beowulf, this sense of fate, or what they would have called weird, WYRD, this doom that's been decided beforehand. What's going to happen is already preordained. It's often phrased in terms of God will give me victory or defeat. Beowulf says, when I go to fight Grendel's mother, God will either give her victory or me. So there's this sense then of which I can't control what's going to happen. So I'm not going to kind of mope about it. I'm just going to do my best. And if I win, well, praise to God. If I lose, well, that's that. And I guess that's, if we're looking at comparisons between Anglo Saxon and Norse, I think there's a very strong connection there. I think as well, there's this sense, you mentioned it in your kind of previous question, of this, we relate to it because we are deracinated in a very similar way, insofar as many of us, although even if we live in our own homelands, we're probably not in our original communities that our grandparents grew up in. We don't have that family. We also live in societies where our relationship to the ruler is not personal. It's not like Beowulf, who's a Thane of Higelac, who serves him personally, and they have a personal relationship which is unbreakable, essentially. We have to relate to some bureaucrat in a council somewhere we have no accountability to, we have no personal relationship with, and it feels very fragile and shallow. And then finally, to go back to this ruins point, okay, the Saxons are both kind of maybe in their own kind of ruins of their society have had to move on to a new one, but then also they're in the Roman ruins that we were discussing earlier. Many of us live in the ruins of previous societies. So in England, you've got Victorian Britain conquered the world and achieved remarkable things in terms of industry and science and so on, in literature. And we live in the ashes of that. We can't even hope to create the same things that they did. We don't have the spirit, and I doubt we would have the expertise. And even if we went further back, there's medieval churches still in England, cathedrals like Westminster Abbey. We passed that. We maybe go on tour there. We couldn't build it today. And so I think there's a sense in which we can relate to the Wanderer because he has that experience too in his context that we're having today in modernity. So I would see those three things as maybe connecting our experience with the poems. Does that kind of concord with what you feel, Matt?
Yeah, no, definitely. That, I think that kind of hits on maybe why it's so resonant. To hit on kind of a couple points, there is, I think, for the vast majority of people, there is that deep desire to be able to pledge loyalty to something, to pledge service, to rally behind a banner. And the modern world, modern politics, it'll occasionally provide a glimpse of that, but it's usually very fleeting. It oftentimes, I think, and not to jump into American politics on a specific level, but there are many lessons, I think, in the current state of leadership, which is that there is this desire to fully, put our trust in princes, as the scriptures would say, but that tends to lead to disappointment. And you still have princes, if you will, of our past where, it was very hit or miss. You wouldn't always get a good king, you wouldn't always get a good jarl, but there still was that personal connection that you had to them. It wasn't someone you saw on TV. It was, oh, he's part of my village. He's the leader of the village, or he's the leader of our set of clans. And there was that deeply personal connection. I mean, there was that idea kind of that the king is a father in many ways to the people. He's sort of the supreme patriarch of the community, and that it is this familial connection that you have, and that's something you just don't really get anymore. And then kind of coming back to the point you made about not living in the same place that even your grandparents did. I think about in America in particular, it's the case, pretty much everywhere in the developed world now, where people move around frequently and they go from place to place. The economy isn't such that people can typically live wherever they want. Oftentimes, if you specialize in a trade, you have to move to another place. But in America in particular, you do get this. There was some report that came out that said Americans move, over 20 times in their lifetime, something like that, which is, every few years you're moving to a new place. And I can believe it. I mean, I'm not in the place I was where I grew up. I've moved several times since then. And, each time there's this breaking of bonds. You can't ever quite rebuild the same connection that you had to, say, a childhood friend. Those sorts of like really deep roots are things that are constantly broken all the time, just due to the nature of living in the modern world. And so there is that really strong longing. Everyone is pretty much made in exile, even if it's not as dramatic or not. And again, it's hard to even say that things aren't as dramatic, because I think this is kind of a separate point, but can you really have great drama if the environment around you is ugly, like, or is even kitsch? Can you, if you're in, what's the name of that town that's in the memes where they're looking out and it's all the gas stations and the drive-throughs and the McDonald's. They're looking. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but yeah, it's like this American town somewhere in the east of the U.S. where you look through and you just see just endless sort of commercial developments.
I think the answer is like obviously yes, because you just look at this system or encroachment as the monster, like as the dragon,
Yeah.
And you just develop a mode of being that you stand against it, and you are trying to counter it by being a different way. You should just develop a mode of being that is, you just don't take part in this, both in the mentality of this like modernist rationalist consumer mentality. Just develop this mythical and hope it will like infect as many people as possible. So just
okay, I found the town. Let me see if I can add a slide. I haven't done. Yeah, this is my first time doing live stream through StreamYard. So let me see if I can pull this up here. It's Breezewood. I finally remembered.
Breezewood, yes.
Breezewood. So Breezewood kind of defines this idea of total alienation, really.
It's just the fires of Isengard spreading, It's not.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, you guys can keep talking. I'll just be pulling this up in the background.
I mean, my solution is like, just don't live in places like that. But obviously, there's a problem. Like a place like this will be built close to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main issue. But
I think one thing that's jumped out at me reading Beowulf and kind of literature around it, and I think this is a connection we can draw with the Norse tradition too, is this well, let me roll back a second to a distinction between Norse mythology and Greek mythology, and if I'm totally wrong, guys, please correct me. But in the Greek mythology, when Odysseus, for example, takes on the Cyclops is the son of Poseidon. So he is a divine being, or he's got divine blood in him. And the monsters within the Greek world tend to be the children of various gods. And the conflicts tend to be between various Greek gods, but they're never really under threat of extinction. Whereas in the Norse tradition, and this is from Tolkien's lecture on Beowulf itself, actually, he points out that, well, actually, for the Norse, there are the gods who, allied with men, are fighting against the monsters, essentially. And the monsters are going to win at Ragnarok, but nonetheless, there's a much more clear division between the two camps. And this gets intensified with the Christian kind of aspect of Beowulf, where the monsters like Grendel are identified with the cursed children of Cain. So they're enemies of God now. And the text itself describes them as enemies of all mankind. But again, they eventually, the dark powers, they can be withstood for a time. So Beowulf, the mightiest of men, could defeat Grendel. He could defeat Grendel's mother. But although he is able, with the help of his thane Wiglaf, to defeat the dragon, he himself is mortally wounded. And this is a warning, or the sign that his kingdom is going to also be plunged into warfare too. So there's this sense of the darkness will win, unless, you know, if human beings can't withstand the darkness by themselves, they can stand with courage, but eventually their civilization will pass, and it's only God who can defeat it. And so part of me kind of thinks, well, actually, part of the problem is many of us still think that there's some hope of the... Oh, we've lost Nord. Is he back? You're back.
I kind of did everything trying to get my Breezewood image in, so that's my dogged determination almost.
Yeah, so you're saying that only like this is beyond our ability to defeat, but it will be defeated in the end because. So that's what you're saying. I understand.
Yeah, well, think of this northern courage. It's like even though you're going to be defeated, you still fight, and I kind of feel.
And that ties into sort of the Christian idea of revelation as well. I mean, you can see why that's kind of a natural mindset to transition to for the Germanics.
It's kind of like the idea, like you are going to lose, you are going to die, you are going to fail because you're mortal, but you're like being tested by the gods or God. You know, because like Valhalla is like a recruiting ground basically. So to fight against the chaos, the same is like you can argue that in Christianity, human life is just a test of your character. That's why you're so powerless and frail. So,
well, somebody earlier in the chat said death is not always a defeat, and I think they were onto something with this, because even when these characters, let's just say they lose, like they are killed, that's not a refutation of them. That as long as they are courageous, as long as they give everything, so like Beowulf, he's willing to fight a dragon to protect his people, even though he dies through that process. It's not like saying therefore Beowulf was a bad guy or he was weak or something. It's actually a testament to his strength and his honor and his willingness to uphold what's good in the world, that he was willing to fight a dragon. Right? So
do you think that was part of the original telling of Beowulf? Because arguably, does that fit better in a Christian context of just total self-sacrifice, or would that still have worked in the older pagan conception of the values of glory and death? I mean, that's kind of, and that ties in a little bit to Teutonic Warriors question here, because I am very curious. I mean, is that a result? Like, would that have been viewed by the earlier pagans as being this great heroic act to, self-sacrifice, even if it doesn't. I mean, you go to heaven instead of Valhalla, but that is something that's like, okay, is that kind of a characteristic of the Christianization at that time, or the English putting their own modifications to the story?
I would say that there is at least a connection within Beowulf itself. The author he inserts the story of Sigurd slaying Fafnir, and as a connection to Beowulf, and kind of indicating to the reader that there's going to be a similar end. Sigurd eventually is killed, right? Not by the dragon, but he is killed, and so there is this sense in which Beowulf is himself. He's going to slay a dragon, but he will also die. So the author certainly wants to say this is in line with Norse values of certain kind, that this is equally heroic. Sigurd was a hero, but that doesn't stop the inevitable. That doesn't stop fate, and it doesn't stop the darkness from winning. But nonetheless, it lines up. I think there is a... Yeah, you come in, Fiona.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Nortur made a comment about Christianity's influence on the sagas. I actually have like a personal take on this issue, because many accuse like Snorri of imposing Christian influence on the sagas when he wrote it, but I think that's absurd, because literally they've done this like textual studies on the sagas recently, the same as they did with like Old Testament, and they found that they have actually different authors, different guys writing them down, but most likely under the supervision of Snorri. So he was like he had probably pupils writing down and collecting these stories. He was just a collector of stories. He was not editing anything. He made his own. He clearly distinguished his own personal views and commentaries in the prologue when he said like he thought that the gods were humans originally from this and that place, and he distinguished that from the actual stories.
They were from Troy, I believe, in the prologue.
So,
he speculates, he's like, oh, Troy had fallen, and then they left and traveled north.
So he was a true scholar. He was like real nuanced. He was like, this is my personal opinion, and this is the actual material. These are the actual stories I collected. And also, you have, if you compare the story of Saxo Grammaticus and the Heimskringla, Gylfaginning, I think, on the death of Baldur, they are two completely different stories. In Saxo's version, Baldur is like, he makes, I can't exactly remember, he has this magical power. He's literally impervious, and he's this brutal warlord, and he and Höður is competing for this woman, and Höður finds this weak spot and kills Baldur. This is very similar to Achilles. So, and this Greek hero, and then Baldur dies, but he's not. But in Snorri's version, he is this Christ-like figure. He is this pure, virtuous, the purest of the gods, the most morally virtuous, and sinless, quote unquote. And Höður is this like blind figure that accidentally kills him. And Loki is like this Judas character that betrays him and is responsible for his death. And he almost gets resurrected from the dead, from hell. So he's like So he's like a half failed Christ, but he is almost there. So I think this obviously, these myths were like saturated from like centuries of cultural influence from Christianity ever since the settlement of Iceland, because one of our earliest settlers were actually, they believed in both Christ and pagan deities. There are clear evidence of that, and these stories then changed over time. Once after we became Christian, they were just like when Christian influence grew, the stories changed over. That's my theory, at least, and that's not just collected this version of a story. While in Saxo's version, it's either clearly influenced from the Iliad, or it's remarkably similar, but the same story, quote unquote.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating kind of comparison that you make there. I think as well, I want to just add in a couple of things from Beowulf on this point, because I think many of the values, as you say, there's a kind of, because of there's been a lot of influence already leading up to it, there's going to be crossover. But what's interesting about Beowulf and some of the Saxon poems is I think you can make a case that although there's like the core of it corresponds or ties in well with the Norse mythology and its values, there's little lines here or there where the author, the Christian author who's writing that poem, is criticizing the values expressed by the characters in the poem. So, for example, right at the end of Beowulf, you have this very interesting line about the treasure that's given, kind of when Beowulf's dead, the kind of commending his body to death with this hoard. It says, they bequeathed the gleaming gold, treasure of men, to the earth, and there it still remains, as useless to men as it was before. This is quite an interesting thing to say, that it was useless. There's a kind of suggestion that maybe they shouldn't be just giving gold to the dead. There's another line earlier on where Wiglaf, who was the only Thane to defend Beowulf from the dragon, he's such an interesting character because he recognizes what Beowulf has done for him and as a lord, and is willing to defend him. He says, we were unable to dissuade our lord from fighting the dragon. And there's this suggestion that Beowulf, he says, I'm going to fight the dragon alone. I alone can do this. And it turns out he couldn't do it by himself. He needed his Thane to help him. And there's this kind of suggestion in other poems too, this idea of seeking glory can be good, but oftentimes it leads somebody to be overbold when they could have taken a more rational course of action. So really, Beowulf could have attacked the dragon with all of his Thanes, and it would have been a better fight or a more equal fight for him. But because he wanted glory, because he wanted to take the fame of defeating the dragon, he did it alone. Same with Grendel, right? And Grendel's mother. And we see this in other Saxon poems, this sort of Christian criticism, whereas I don't think you would find that sort of criticism in the Norse mythology. If anything, it's like, this is what you're supposed to do. If you're challenged, if you back down, if you say, oh, I need to get my mates in this, that shows fear. And that's something you cannot do. That's dishonorable. So when Gunnar is kind of warned that Atli or Attila is going to kill him if he goes to the dinner, when he hears the warning, that's when he decides to go, because it would be dishonorable to not go then, knowing he'll die. So that's kind of the counter of this criticism, if you see what I mean. That was a roundabout way of kind of making the point, but
no, he actually was like recommended to flee.
Yes.
But he turns around and he says like famous line like fögur er hlíðin og hvergi fer ég, eða fer ég eigi. It means like fair is the hill and I'm going nowhere. And so it's basically like saying like fuck it, I'm gonna make my stand here. So so I'm not sure like it's expected of him to. It is because he is like a unique example. He's willing to make the stand of his, for his not his honor, but it's just like a recognition that how you live and how you go out, is like more important than like living into old age and whatever, So
I think this picture encapsulates that
Yeah.
idea. I mean, is this North Sea fatalism?
yeah, it's just,
Exactly.
this is like, oh my god. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think you had similar criticism like this in Icelandic sagas. For example, you had these horrible female characters that
Oh, what's her name in the Vinland sagas?
yeah,
Daughter.
the witch. I can't. She like
Not the witch, but the oh shoot, what's her name? Who's Eric the Red's daughter or granddaughter? And then she lies to everyone that, oh yeah, this guy was like abusing me, and then proceeds to just like kill everyone in the camp.
yeah, like
Is that what you're getting at?
yeah, women. Like you also have like the wife Gunnar. She's like a total bitch. She had 3 of her previous husbands killed because she didn't like them, and she's indirectly responsible for Gunnar's death because I mean he slaps her because she's trying to start a feud, I think, between him and Njáll, I think his friend, or she like insulted his friend or something, and she like holds this grudge until the end, like he doesn't forgive him, and when he's about to die, he runs out of his bowstring breaks, and he asks for a lock of her hair to keep on firing, and she refuses, and so he dies. But it's like a theory, like she refuses because he's going to die anyway, but still she shows her character. You have few female characters like this, like always these feuds are mostly always started by women, so it's kind of like a
Deep truths.
Jezebel, influence. Yeah.
Someone had an interesting Twitter thread recently, which was that, although Tolkien has been accused of, I don't know, it's not even worth mentioning. It's so bottom of the barrel. But someone had an interesting Twitter thread where they were saying that Tolkien is actually, quite kind and quite quite nice in his portrayal of women.
Yeah.
Portraying them as like really he's like extra generous to them in terms of portraying them as having good qualities compared to many of the women of the sagas.
Eowyn is like this ideal shield maiden of Rohan, like compared to the women of the sagas, like she's like a saint, like literally.
Oh yeah.
It's like vindictive, spiteful, treacherous, but they are like maybe outliers, because that's why they are notorious.
Well, also as well for Tolkien, and this again comes. I think this is an implication of his Beowulf lecture. He really thinks that the power of Beowulf is that the enemy is not human, but is a monster, because then it encapsulates that impending doom which faces all of humanity. And so in Lord of the Rings, the enemies are not, I mean, there's some other humans in the service of these beings, but it tends to be like great beings like Sauron, or I guess if you wanted a female character, Shelob, right? But it's monstrous. It's not just another faction. So he's really trying to tap into that, But then also, and this is another comment he makes, this shift, he thinks that Beowulf and some of the other Saxon poems, they live at the transition from a pagan to Christian society, and so they bring together some of the kind of cultures together. But after this time, maybe, you know, more high Middle Ages and so on, the real enemy is no longer a temporal foe like a dragon or a monster, but that which can afflict the soul. And well, if you look at Lord of the Rings, the main antagonist is the ring, which tempts people. So he's kind of, so you can see in Tolkien's own work, I guess, a shift away from Norse mythology, and that represented in Beowulf in those regards, even if he's drawing on symbols and stories, towards a more what he would see as a medieval Christian kind of story about the soul, essentially.
Tolkien's stories are technically a part, I think, of the same genre as the sagas. They are like written in a similar way, and they have like poems in between, and they have like a same essentially writing style, except in different languages.
And yeah, the writing style, I mean, it's really like when you're going from the sagas and you're reading the poetry in there and going to the other literature, I mean, it's just
same. It's technically, like from a scholarly perspective, it's the same genre of literature, but you know, Tolkien's it's conscious from Tolkien. He was doing the same thing, but for England, for the Saxons that didn't exist.
But I mean, can we mention just how beautiful the language is? I mean, just you get a lot of it where it's two adjectives and then a verb or a noun. You know, it's like I'll pull up an example here, but you get these like just wonderfully descriptive language within it, where it's like the iron shattered prow, or the, you know, something to that effect, where it's just imbuing it with all this visual and tactile and sensory language. So it's like, oh, you're standing there, the spray of the sea is in your face. The descriptions of violence, in particular, Beowulf, are shockingly gruesome. You know, you'd think, oh, it's old timey, so it's gonna be like polite. They're like, oh no, they like ripped their arm off and blood flew everywhere. They like shattered their bones and the monster devoured these men. It's like, oh my goodness, wow, like that's intense. And I mean, I think it goes to show that it's like a lot of this stuff was written or developed in such a way to be presented. It's to be acted out and spoken in a dramatic way. It's not meant to be, you know.
It's also unique because it's actually much better to read the sagas in Icelandic, because we have words similar to German that have exclusive meaning, that are made for a specific phrase that English cannot exactly encapsulate. You understand? For example, the German word Zeitgeist, you know, you don't have a English equivalent to that. And you have many words in Icelandic like that. And that's why it's difficult to translate the sagas, in my opinion. So you can only, it also has, when you use these words in certain context, it brings forth or elaborates a specific, unique type of humor, that like a laconic humor that you cannot find otherwise. It's difficult to explain.
Did you guys speak? And Nathan, you were reading "Laughing Shall I Die," which has a lot to do with Viking humor. I mean, do you want to touch on that? And is there a connection to kind of the English sense of humor? Or is that, would you say that's pretty unique?
That's a good question. I mean, just before I answer that, I just want to say I think you're totally right about it being it's meant to be sung or spoken, right? It's not meant to be read by yourself, and that's one of the difficulties as a modern audience with these things. Is it's totally different. Like going to the theater, it's totally different reading, seeing Shakespeare than reading Shakespeare, right? We have to do it at school. It's terribly boring for most people, just reading like King Lear, but we see it live, it's a totally different thing. I think on the humor thing, you do get a lot of kind of black comedy or dark comedy in Britain, but I think traditionally, and
I would try to describe it as like mimetic comedy rather than black because you have like these many clever insults and these ridiculous reasons why they fight, and it's like that sort of thing, you know. It's funny because it's so absurd, you know, like absurdity, you know, like makes fun of, you know, if wounded egos and stuff like that, you know.
Well, I think that's a good way of putting it. And in that case, then I don't think it's exactly the same. But when you get to like the medieval era, the sort of humor, it's silliness. There's a kind of silliness to it. And if you get so around like Christmas time, there would be a lot of festivities during the medieval calendar. It would be 12 days to Epiphany. The 12 days of Christmas would be just partying. And they would have a character, the Lord of Misrule, who would normally be like a servant or a lower class person, and they would get to be in charge of the community for 12 days. They would get to be treated like a lord, and they could make all these fun pranks and revelries. The nobles would have to serve them. There would also be a lot of kind of dressing up in different costumes and maybe a bit pantomime-like, but it's all rather silly and absurd, just as you said, absurd. And it turns the world upside down, but then after 12 days, you go back to it being normal. I think that kind of spirit of merriment, Merry England, as it's described, a bit kind of naughty. I think there's a bit. It's not the same. It's not the kind of violence of the Norse stuff.
We have the same sense of humor, though. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
We have exactly like Icelandic comedy shows, for example, are really similar to English. Like we don't have the same type of humor as Americans or Germans, or like we have very similar than the English. That's always like people say, like this Monty Python sense of humor.
Yes. Ridiculous.
Yeah. That's also like I'm saying, like it's also in the sagas to an extent. It's like it's supposed to be a bit over the top, you know, like how people are killed and how it's like, remember that when a knight gets killed in the Monty Python, like you have like similar cases, like it's overkill deaths in the sagas. It's deliberately written like that to be kind of humorous, you know.
It's only a flesh wound.
Yeah, it's only like you
saying,
have these guys that are like cleaved to the waist, like through the head. It's like really common, like, you know, what the hell, you know.
But again, that ties in with that kind of defiance thing as well. So it's not just defiance; it's a humorous defiance. Like I defeat you by making fun of you. You're not undermining your seriousness, even though you've just like cut me in half.
Yeah, then I'm gonna come back as a ghost and kill you again, and you have to kill me again, you know, and cut my head off and put it behind my butt cheek, so I won't, you know, come back again. It's like that's literally what you had to do to prevent a ghost or draugur from returning.
Yes.
It's very much like that meme where you have the guy who's in tactical gear and he's hunting the sort of Wendigo in the night, and I mean it's that sort of facing of death, which is it's that much more aggressive way of facing kind of the monsters. It's not just like, oh, spooky monsters. It's like, I'm gonna go strangle that monster out there in the woods to death. I'm gonna strangle the sea serpent, as Beowulf does when he just dives into the ocean. It doesn't strangle it, but he's just like, all right, I'm just gonna dive into the ocean and tackle this great sea creature.
And well, and I think as well that tying it back in with fate, if you believe that it's even if you do your best, you might lose. There's a kind of the pressure's off, right? So you can have that cavalier attitude in a way that if as many, I think it's quite typical of the modern era that we want to control everything and have everything like kind of mastered. And if something's out with our control, then everything has to be done to stop it from happening. So like I was, I don't know why I do this, but I was going through like what Elon Musk was tweeting the other night. And he was like, he was responding to somebody and he said, yeah, you should have the choice of when you die. It's against your freedom if you die at a time like that you didn't decide. And I was like, okay, that's very trying to control everything. Whereas actually, if you believe it's, fate might determine you die when you cross the road, or if you go and fight this monster, or if you do anything, well, why you can be humorous about it. There is a bit kind of fun because it's not up to you, as it were.
You can either be humorous or nihilistic. It's like a two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
yeah, the mentality, the Norse mentality is like being humorous and just accepting it and laughing at it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And just modern like is like, oh, I'm going to die. It's like the other one is like, yes, I'm going to die. It's really funny.
Well, nowadays the state even supplies the way of doing that, right?
Yeah, that's just like a twisted in a different sense, because it's more of a, you just do it to avoid suffering. But the Norse mentality to face suffering is to laugh at it and embrace it and overcome it. Because they were like suffering all the time, probably.
Well, this maybe connects to another thing that I was thinking about. When Matt, you were talking about the kind of exploration, the grasping for the infinite within, kind of Anglo-Norse cultures. And one thing that struck me was in Beowulf, although he goes to a different land, he's not actually trying to find a new land, let's say. But how that's expressed is he wants to conquer the like leviathans, essentially. He wants to like wrestle Grendel to and in a way, like, he's the strongest man. It's said he's like the strength of 30 men is within one hand. But he's going up against like a beast who in a way represents the dark infinite, that power, those powers which are beyond human ken. Same with like he tells a story of like wrestling sea beasts, on a massive voyage, like in the ocean itself. Does this not sound a bit like Captain Ahab trying to get Moby Dick? And like the conquest. It's not just exploration; it's the desire to conquer and dominate a being much more powerful than the human race. That seems to be in Beowulf quite strongly. And
I think this is.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is hitting at what I've been trying to figure out for a while, which is what is this Faustian spirit that we have as sort of part of the North Sea? Is this sort of just mindless, endless expansion, mindless sort of Borg? We're just gonna expand and expand and expand and consume and create and just build more and more. On this almost sort of Isengard type mode, or is it something else? Is there a proper orientation of the Faustian spirit? And I think what you're capturing there is like, okay, the proper spirit is going out into the world, going out to find the greatest challenges, the greatest monsters of the frontier, and for almost in a sense of like a sporting sense. It's like, all right, I'm gonna test my strength. I'm gonna see, can I take on this beast in the wilderness? Can I go and challenge that and grow stronger through that? That desire for this sort of conflict and challenge and warfare. And that might be the proper orientation, and maybe the improper orientation of that is something like endlessly expanding just to cover everything, to sort of smother everything, to make everything look like Breezewood. That's maybe the improper Faustian mode of being, and then the healthy one is taking on the beasts on the frontier. But I suppose that can manifest kind of in other unhealthy ways, where you're maybe putting your nose in places where you shouldn't be, and you're just sort of causing havoc everywhere because you're just killing anything that's strong. But
I think like a Romans had a proper interpretation, like a execution of it, because wherever they went, they built like roads and beautiful buildings, while the modern empire builds makes everything like this Breezewood town basically. So the Romans made their conquered space, or they tried to make it better than it was, more stable. So that's like a proper implementation of it.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, this kind of brings up the question, which is at kind of the heart of a lot of this discussion, and what I don't have a good answer to, which is what is. I mean, we can obviously see there are differences between the Norse and the English sort of experience of being, but what is that sort of core commonality? I mean, you could say sort of the Indo-European commonality. You could say it's Faustian. You could say it's love of ale or something. But what is at the core of that? What do you guys think? And Nathan, you should probably get to your point first, if that's going in a different direction.
I forgot my point. So Fiona, if you wanted to answer that question first, I'll think about what the core commonality.
Well, I think we actually have more in common than like I would, example, say that we have more in common with the English than we have with the Germans, because of like geographical circumstances, at least maybe not during the Viking Age, but in this Viking Age you had like strong individuals, and you had to rely on friends and connections, and that was everything basically. It was not like a state. It was not that collectivist basically. It was much more individualistic. It became more collectivist later, So that's where I think I see the the commonality, like a difference between, for example, honor-bound societies and law-based societies. Like I think all honor-based societies are very similar, but and I think you had, because also these were both Germanic societies, like Saxon kingdoms and Scandinavia, and they also lived there, like they were permanently settled in these places for a long time. So they were not moving all the time or being invaded as much as the continentals. So it's kind of I think Spengler talks about it. It's kind of individualism develops a certain type of individualism, which leads to certain ideas. For example, there's a reason why like theory of evolution came from England. It's like this individuals against the world competing, It's like a really, really, really English idea. And you also talk about like Viking, individualism. It's like Viking plundering. It's like, it's very interesting. In Iceland, have you heard about the before the 2007 financial crash? We had these like business guys, you know, they invested in these companies abroad, among in England, took like loans, and they tanked and they indebted the whole nation. They also like got the money from Iceland and to take these loans, and like the loans were staked by the Icelandic banks, but they got away with all the money. So they were like literally plundering for England again, you know. So it was like, what's the difference between like these guys in a suit, like they're doing the exact same thing and hoarding all the treasure to themselves and not giving it back to the community, just like the Vikings did, you know, but they're wearing suits and using like business tactics instead of like, you know, long ships. So it's kind of a similar mentality, I think. Same with like the British Empire. Like you had a more refined tactic of extracting, you know, resources from conquered peoples, you know. So that's my take on it, basically. It's like a less blunt and obvious way of plunder than the early and the Dark Ages, basically.
The more blunt way, though, at least involves involves more danger. So you're going to get sagas written about the more blunt way, because that involves a certain level of daring and adventurism that the sort of corporate banking type of
I mean to stake a wealth, to stake like this huge wealth, and you know the economy is like going to tank, and you just take advantage of it, and everybody loses except for you, and you get away like a bandit, you know. It's like it's the same thing, basically, you know, but you know, in the modern context, like these guys were literally called útrásarvíkingarnir, or what's it called? The direct translation would be, you know, outward Vikings or something. Like it's literally like they were doing like business like Vikings do, you know. It's like the Danegald is a more efficient way of plunder than raiding, you know. And then it develops into this refined imperial model, and then, you know, this venture capital, you know, fraudulent stocks, you know. That's like the even more refined version of it. That's just like how I look at it. But yeah, what are your takes on it?
I think the, you know, the common identity, common culture. I think you're totally right that there's a lot of crossover, and I think you really hit the nail on the head of the standing against the world, or standing against, you know, the darkness and trying to fight it. We see that in both of these, the Saxon and Norse traditions. I think as well the hunt for glory. We've kind of been speaking about that. That's very strong in both traditions as well. I do think that there is a bit of difference. It's just a tonal difference. I don't think it's a major difference with the Saxon kind of elegy being in the ruins. Seems a bit different, but I think the other things are the common binding point. And of course, you know, many scholars have I think shown that you know, the Norse mythology is very close to what we can conjecture the English had before Christianity, because we don't have the kind of records or the stories preserved, but it seems likely that, you know, they had Wotan and so on. So I think there's a lot of crossover there, and only maybe a tonal difference, really.
Well, the inverse of that too is that the Danes and the Norwegians in particular, you know, just the Vikings in general, get portrayed as, or they sort of get the blame of being the barbarians who are just massacring and stealing and causing havoc, precisely because they were Christianized at a later date and they were incorporated into broader Christendom at a later point. So they're the ones we have the written records of. We really don't have the same sorts of records about, the exploits of the Angles and the Saxons on the continent, or some of the
I think
Celts.
this raiding, like going Viking and plundering. I mean, Christianity did not, didn't have that much of an impact on it because the Danes, the Norwegians, they continued the Viking raids after they were Christian. I think the biggest Viking raid in the Isles was launched by Christian Vikings.
Yeah.
So
that
this
gets
didn't
overlooked
stop.
a lot. I mean, about half of the Viking age, the Vikings were mostly Christian. And you could say, okay, some people would say, okay, well, were they really Christian? Were they basically just pagan? But it's like, I think you can, I'm kind of the mindset that you can.
No,
It's sort of applying a modern lens to what it means to be a Christian. Well, the modern lens is that what it means to be a Christian is to just be, living in the suburbs and taking your kids to soccer practice and going to Bible study once a week. And it's a very modern conception of what it is to be a Christian. When when pretty much everyone of the time had this incredibly warlike mentality, and
well,
the English and the Scots and so forth, they didn't view fighting between themselves as being necessarily a violation of being Christians. They're like, oh, this is just what we do, and the Danes and the
some of the most brutal, fiercest Viking figures were Christians, like conquerors.
Teutonic warrior lays out.
Yeah. So this, okay, there's also this misconception that Christianity is pacifist, which is utterly complete nonsense. Because if you look at the earliest converts of Christianity, during St. Paul's time, they were Roman legionaries. So.
And Christ praises the legionary, as C.S. Lewis writes in his essay, Why I'm Not a Pacifist. He writes about how Christ praises the legionary, but he doesn't say the legionary like he does to some others, like, go forth and sin no more. Being a legionary. He praises him without a
sword. Yeah. He doesn't say, stop being a legionary. He commends him for his loyalty to Caesar and, shames the Pharisees for not being that loyal to God, So, and also St. Paul did not tell the legionnaires to stop fighting. So it's actually, this was a point that philosophers made emphasized in Prussia, when Prussia was Christian, that St. Paul blessed the legionnaires and commended them for the bravery, and they were Christian and they kept fighting. So the Prussian soldiers do not make peace with, just do your duty, basically. That's a very Christian thing. So it doesn't affect militarism in any way. So yeah.
Sorry, continue. Finish your point, Fiona.
Yeah, so the most if I think of a true pacifist religion, it's maybe Hinduism or Jainism. That's that you cannot literally hurt anything, and you have to eat things that have died naturally. It's that. That's a really pacifist. Christianity is not, So yeah.
I totally agree with everything you've said. I think there's one caveat here, and maybe this is just the Saxon telling of the story. But they were warlike Christians. Alfred the Great, an obvious example. But when the Vikings first kind of started raiding Saxon England, they targeted monasteries. Lindisfarne and Iona were two of the first places that were sacked.
Because they had all the gold. they had
lots of gold, right? But these were not military combatants. And I'm unclear whether this is actually true or not, but certainly there's this kind of idea in this the Saxon period that you don't attack these sorts of places because they are holy sites, because they are monks. So even if there's, on both sides, there's warlike Christians that are quite willing to kind of massacre the enemy, this seems to be a point which the Saxons certainly saw certain groups of Vikings as particularly against their form of Christianity, or particularly horrific for their attacks on these sorts of monasteries. So I think that might be why this idea originates, that the Vikings are kind of enemies of Christianity, is because they attacked sites that the Saxons themselves wouldn't ever have attacked because of their Christianity.
If you read,
but that's that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a Viking Christian, if you see what I mean.
If you read Saint Olaf Saga and saga called Hvítikristur, I think it's a saga of, there are two Olafs, by the way. It's called Olafur Hvítikrist, a story about him and how he played like a big part in conversion of Norway. You get a bit of a mentality into how Vikings or pagans viewed religious matters, and it was completely different than the Christian Saxons and the Christians overall did. It was very like grok-brained. It was just literally, if your god can defeat my god, your god stronger. It's like big is strong. It's like literally like this. If, for example, like Saint Boniface, when he cut down the tree, everybody thought he was going to be struck down by the god, by their god, the pagan god. And when he wasn't, he was all right. Everybody thought, okay, his god is pretty strong. He's stronger than our god. He's protecting him from our wrath of our god, which means he's probably stronger. His god is probably stronger, so we're gonna convert. That's literally how they thought. It's like, so there's a story of Saint Olafur. He literally said, like, I have a protection of my god, and you have the protection of your god, and we're gonna fight, and the one who wins has the stronger god. So bring it. And that's the whole saga basically, and how he ends up like his army won, which means his god is superior. And that's also how Clovis converted. That's basically the mindset, So maybe they were attacking this holy site because, okay, if you try to attack these holy sites, will their god punish us? We're going to test that, So we have the protection of our god, and we're going to attack their holy site, and our god is stronger, and their god is weaker, and we're going to raid their holy site to prove that our god is stronger. That's the mentality. It's not like animosity towards the religion. They probably did that to every other faith that they came across. There's like echoed in the saga that the Æsir and the Vanir is just like a different pantheon conquered by the Germanic tribe. More powerful gods absorb lesser gods. So it's different, like a grok-brained religion. It's like that's probably the mentality. Like no metaphysics.
Yeah, I mean very very orc, like war.
It's like
mode. Yeah.
Gork and Mork is like the human emperor.
Oh, they got the bigger god there.
Human emperor is like a god worthy of challenging Gork or Mork, basically. But they probably respected, this foreign god from the east, because he is like, they viewed it like he is a god of these big shining cities to the south, and
The god of Miklagard.
Yeah, and everybody who worship him is like rich, and that's how probably they viewed him. Like he is this god of like rich people and shining cities and whatever, and we're gonna test how powerful he is. That's the mentality. It's like literally like a crack brain, you know. But yeah.
I know Nathan isn't able to stay on forever, so I think one last question I had for Nathan, and I don't know how much you want to get into this, Nathan, but in terms of, because you kind of have a unique experience, right? Because you're Scottish by descent, but kind of grown up around England. I mean, is that so? What kind of is your, and maybe in some sense, maybe you are kind of more vested in the English sense of things or the English history. Do you? I mean, in what sense do you think kind of the Scottish are similar and different to the Norse history and to the English history?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I think one key difference to begin with is the Saxons, for the most part, didn't really conquer much of Scotland or invade much of Scotland. You've got the southeast, which maybe up towards Edinburgh, you would have come under the Kingdom of Northumbria at one point, but in general, the rest of Scotland isn't come under Saxon. Whereas Norse colonies do form in the west coast of Scotland towards Ireland. So we've got that Irish connection there. The Irish Sea,
You get the Norse Gaels forming.
Yeah, so if anything, that's where in Scotland you're going to get the influence of the Norse traditions far stronger than through the Saxon line. I would see it's tricky. I don't think it's as much of an influence, to be honest, in terms of the character of the nation. I feel the Saxon. Let me put it another way. I feel like the English and the Scots, although they formed Britain with the Welsh and Northern Irish, but there are various similarities. But I do think there seems to me some kind of cultural difference, and I wonder if it's like the Scots are more similar to the Irish than they are to the English. So we were talking about like the fairy. I feel like that's more of the tradition. If I was to characterize it, the fairy people than the kind of Norse mythology. That to me seems to be the cultural character. Whether or not it's the historic character, I'm not sure. Fiona, you come in.
Yeah. I was just saying. Okay, I'm gonna reference a bit of memetics here, but you know the Norf FC meme, like this character of Northern Englanders as this big burly dudes, football hooligans. Have you seen that?
Yes.
I would argue actually that these guys, this robust, like huge, these are not Celts. These are like the lineage of the Saxon warrior spirit. Channeling their aggression into hooliganism. They have nothing to. Yeah, exactly. This is like these guys are not Celts. They are Saxons. Like Celt, they're like huge, robust. Not like my dad kind of looks like that. So Celts are a bit different. Like they're like I said, a bit like fairies or for example, if you look at like medieval times in England, I can just picture these guys, in a joust or something, like from this or that village, cheering on their local knight and brawling the other team. And they're doing that still today. And they would then go to war as like men at arms for their, lord. And there's literally nothing has changed. The same dudes with the same mindset as from the Middle Ages. That's just like my
your average Celtic male.
Yeah, I was Celtic.
Celtic male.
Yeah, so there's a difference between.
I'll stop the slander.
There's Celtic and the Saxon. So So I could just picture. I heard also that they literally had like football in the Middle Ages, and they were like literally brawling over football in like the 1400s. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And
nothing has changed. These are like the same people from the early Middle Age, from the Saxon, like Saxon guys, sparring and brawling over which lord is best, which area, and then like which football team, and continued, and then they went to war for the liege lord, whatever. Like same spirit. This is like an untouched bio spirit that lives on in England, I would argue. So this archetype is kind of underestimated, in my opinion. It's something to look up to. This glorious Saxon archetype. It's like you should embrace it. That's what I'm saying. The English should embrace this meme.
You're going to see me in a very different appearance next time.
Yeah, yeah, but you're Celtic. You're not from the north, like Saxon.
True. I'll have to grow my hair out then.
Yeah.
What's the experience like of being Celtic? I don't have any experience being Celtic. Would you go out in springtime? Do the fairies pop up and the gnomes make themselves known and run around?
I wish
maybe
I knew.
You might be more primally in touch with that stuff. I don't know.
Well, given I was raised in England, maybe I have more in terms of my my outlook with Baz from Norf FC than I do with the fairies. But I do think like and maybe the distinction I'm drawing is maybe too hard and fast. But one thing that struck me actually was that so the Saxon kings would say that their families were descended from Wotan. So they're very much identifying themselves as descendants on the side of the Aesir, of the gods. Whereas when you get to like Celtic mythology, as we were discussing before, like the fairies are the ones that you're descended from, or the giants. So Finn Mac Coel is a giant, and he is one of the heroes of the Irish. Now, maybe this is a false comparison, but of course the Jotnar, the giants, are the enemies of the gods. So I wonder if that would be an interesting thing to explore, is whether this is like a direct challenge within the mythology to different.
Yeah. There are many theories of what the giants are. What the giants are. For example, if I'm going to compare it to another, you have these comparative thing. For example, in some different religions, for example, if you compare Zoroastrianism to Hinduism, you have these two competing deities, or it's called the Asura and the Deva. And in Hinduism, the Deva are the good guys and the Asura are the demons. But in Zoroastrianism, it's the opposite. So it's just like a fuck you to Indians, from the Iranians, basically. So it's it's very weird. These are obviously the same entities, they have the same, sound the same, and they are depicted in the same way. But in one religion they are good, and in the other they are, reverse roles. So, but no one actually knows like what the giants are. They're kind of a enigma. Like many theories, they seem to be a bit different than the gods. There's even theories like if they're old gods or they are obviously related to the gods. But could they be like a different pantheon? But I think it's obvious that the Vanir, they are a different pantheon that was absorbed into the Aesir. It was like probably from a different tribe or different culture, because you have Freyr and Njörður and those guys, Freyja, and they are like described as lesser gods, but still gods.
I'm just waiting for the next God of War, where they move to Irish mythology and just kill all of the giants there instead of the gods in Norse mythology.
But I'm like picturing an Anglo Saxon workbench, like literally, like they probably would be like, big bassa from, and gas, on the front lines. Like they probably look like that and probably have the same.
Yeah.
And it's like this is the Saxon biospirit. Like we don't have that here. We have become too, too prude. We don't have types like this here. We are not that aggressive. We are too docile. Too polite. Maybe that's like, I don't know why that is. Maybe we used to be more like that, but who knows? So.
well, the thing is, so that would be a working class kind of English phenotype.
Yeah,
but and culture, but that's the one that's most under attack in Britain at the moment, actually. So I think that's quite interesting that you've identified.
But these guys should be glorified. These big bassa should be the King of England, not Prince Charles. He should be the warlord.
No, he's the Thane to the warlord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need your kind of Conan the Barbarian Beowulf, and then his bazes are following him around.
Yeah, maybe. Just one more thing. Somebody here.
So true. You got to embrace it.
Yeah, you also get a lot of strongmen from the Celts, by the way. But
yes,
most of them come from Iceland. Like not from Norway, only from Iceland.
The mountain, right?
And also Jón Páll Sigmarsson, which was a strongest man in the world in the 80s, and also Magnus Ver. I think he also won the title once.
So, so there was an English guy, Eddie Hall, who won it recently. He's Saxon phenotype that we've just been discussing.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Although he was advertising the McSoy burger that McDonald's had put out, so I couldn't root for him. I was like, no.
Yeah, but Eddie Hall is like he's really short. He's not that tall. Like I actually, it's really funny. I actually went to the same high school as the Mountain.
Really?
And I remember like when he was really skinny. Like he was not skinny. He was like much. He wasn't as big as he was, but he was really tall. And before he was famous, I never talked to him, but yeah.
That's pretty awesome, though.
Pretty awesome. So just one more. Some guy here mentioned in the chat something from the Northmen. I just wanna cover that quick. It's unpopular opinion. I really hate that movie. You're probably gonna disagree with me, but I didn't like it at all for like.
We'll have to do Northman stream sometime because I am a fan of it for the most part. There's I've got a few small gripes with it, but overall I was pretty blown away. I'm trying to find that comment.
I think it was like my gripe with it is like it was like made by aliens or to depict the Vikings as like some animals, like these are like they're fighting for glory and they're fighting for honor and revenge. Like we don't know what that is. It's like devoid of
like in the interviews with the creators where it's like very foreign to them.
Yeah, it's like you could tell that the director that also made it was like this concept of foreign, like they didn't understand the mind. They were trying to just replicate it as they would, like we would make videos about cavemen without understanding how they're thinking. It's just really, really annoying. It's like, and also like it was kind of over the top and didn't capture the spirit of the age.
Well, I know, Nathan. If you've got to hop off, I totally understand. But Yeah, it's probably. I know we could go on for. I feel like we're just scraping the surface, and as we're kind of getting into it, we're like uncovering all these other interesting connections to get to. But
How long have you been on streaming? I can't see the time.
we've been on for 2.5 hours, so it's been a lot of fun.
Should we make it a 3-hour stream?
I'm down for that. I know Nathan's gotta go at some pretty soon, I think.
I've got to bounce, I'm afraid, but I will leave you two gentlemen to it. It's a real pleasure to meet you both, and a real privilege to be on this discussion. I've really enjoyed it and learnt a lot, and thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me on. And
hey,
I hope I get to speak to you both again.
Shill your stuff. Where can people find you? Yeah, shill what you've got.
Oh. Well, I've got a YouTube channel, Nathan CJ Hood. Discuss mythology and fantasy. In a couple of days' time, actually, we're discussing with Scott Mannion, the English Restoration again, our show. We'll be discussing the Battle of Maldon, which is another Anglo Saxon poem. So very much in keeping. But yeah, you can find me there, and also on Twitter as well.
I'm putting the link in chat. So all right, so everyone here in the chat, I know all of you in the chat right there. You see that link? I know you see it. You see it. It's just go click it. You'll love his stuff. Go check it out. Follow Nathan and watch his streams and his videos. He's got some awesome content, especially if you like, Lord of the Rings and stuff. Sneak preview for those of you that stuck around till 2.5 hours in. I am dropping a Lord of the Rings video pretty soon. So.
Oh, amazing!
Amazing. But don't think about my stuff. Go follow Nathan.
No, I need you as my promoter. You're excellent. But yeah, everybody should also like and subscribe and leave a comment under this video. It will make a big difference to the channel. I don't know if you guys know, but the algorithms, like, if somebody watches it and doesn't engage, like with a like or a comment, then it doesn't recommend them to watch more videos from that channel. So if you like this stuff, like the video, because it's excellent stuff on this channel. Really good, really good. Anyway, I better bounce.
So true.
I better bounce.
Hey, thanks for joining up, Nathan.
Have a good one, guys. Have a good one.
See ya. Nice to. Okay, that was. So we're gonna go maybe for half an hour more.
Yeah, we'll do another half hour. And then you were talking about the Northmen, so we'll do another half hour, and then we'll.
Maybe you should
because if I say we're gonna close it out, then people are gonna be thinking, we're at the end. I'm gonna click off. No, don't click off. Stay. Fjolnir's got some great stuff to say. I don't know if I do. I'm sure Fjolnir has some great. Stuff
maybe you should do like a special on the Northmen. I don't know. I don't know if the viewers want to hear me rant about it.
We should get you, and we should get like some guy who really likes it, and just let you guys go at it, and I can moderate.
I don't have that much to say, but I don't know. But I was going to mention another, from the Sagas. I was going to mention, because that's obviously the main topic. Another from Hrolf's Saga Kraki. This was another version of it, or an excerpt of it. This was something I mentioned. I came across in it's like a kind of like a. I don't know where this version came from. It could be from a Saxon version, but it's a bit different. I don't think it's from. I think Snorri's version is called Skjöldunga Saga. It's that's a Saga Hrolf Saga, but I think it's not. It's a bit of a different version, but it could be just a fiction. It's from this like weird old book about the sagas where we had these like cool illustrations of it, so it's probably authentic. But it basically is Böðvarbjarki. It's kind of a humor. It's a good it's a good view into like a more humorous side of it, like more adventurous, a bit pulpy. is this guy like his Beowulf archetype, his Böðvar. He is like riding in a storm in Denmark, and he is like almost lost, and he comes across this small farm. And by the way, there's a law in Scandinavia, you had to host travelers. There was also like in Iceland up until like recently. So it was literally law. And some old couple answered, and he was like this polite, well-dressed, wealthy dude, and he was going to serve the king. He was on his way to the palace, and he was going to, and he asked this couple how to thank them. What can he do? What favors could he do? He has connections to the king, for hosting him, basically saving his life. And he said, they said, our son is also, it's called hirðmaður. It's a part of the court for the king. Could you check up on him and just make sure he's all right, and if he's doing all right? And he said, sure, okay. And he came to the hall, and the king was Hrolfur, this supposed nephew of Hrothgar. And when he came, there was this like, all of the other hirdmen was like, and he asked the king, like he was expecting him, and he, became a hirðmaður and what that. And he was like sitting down on a long table, and there was this like this bully type, it's like described as like he's a big ugly nose, and he basically had to kind of fight for a seat, because they were always like kind of testing him, and he was like looking for their son, and he was like hiding in this pile of bones, basically, because these guys were always like bullying him. He didn't get anything to eat, and they just ate the meat and tossed the remains at him. So he was like hiding in the pile so he wouldn't get hurt, basically. And he saw this utter cowardice. He was like disgusted by this weakness, and he like made the promise to make him a proper hirðmaður, So he grabbed him by the back of the neck, and he was also filthy, and he just went out and put his face in the local pond, dragged him out to clean his face, and just told him to just man up, basically. And then he sat down, and then this bully type decided to try to throw a bone at Böðvar, the Beowulf guy, to try to bully him, test him. And he caught the bone in the mid-air and threw it back at him and knocked him out, basically, and stole his seat. So that's like his entry. It's like kind of like a Clint Eastwood-esque, Western, it's like just he threw a bone at his face, and he was knocked out, and he took a seat at the long table, basically. And then there was like kind of a montage moment where you're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you so pathetic? And he forced him to. He was like, I'm going to take you under my wing because I made a promise to your parents, and you have to stand up for yourself. And it was basically, Virgin vs. Chat, original version. So, and he was like, he had this nickname called Hugdigri, which means brave, but it was kind of ironic because he was a coward. And then they were like forced to. There was like a test. they were forced to. There was a dragon attacking the kingdom, and nobody wanted to face it. They were like stealing the livestock and stuff like that, but Böðvar wanted to face it because he thought he could take it, and he said to him, like, you're coming with me to kill this thing, to make a man out of you, basically, and he followed him, and it's like you're gonna face this dragon, and then like this epic battle between him and the dragon. First it was like Böðvar, and he was. And soon as like this coward figure, like he saw the dragon, he like fled, but then he figured, he saw that the dragon was like had the hero like trapped. He was almost about to kill him. Then he like figured out like, okay, if I don't conquer my fears and face him, I will be a coward forever. So I might as well just like die trying to face him. So he attacked the dragon. And while the dragon was distracted, I think Böðvar found like a weak spot and killed it with his sword or something. So after that, like they both became like honor, like hitmen for the king, and they both ended up in Valhalla. It's like a happy ending sort of thing. So have you ever like heard of this saga before? Or it's like a part, like the same characters as in Hrolf saga, basically. So it's kind of like a classical hero's journey, basically. Sorry, you're muted.
Oh wait, I've been muting myself. I keep doing this. I keep forgetting that I set myself on mute. What I was saying is, yeah, it's like the proto novel, really. I mean, a lot of these sagas, and that's what makes them so engaging. I haven't read that one yet, so that's something I'll have to check out.
I'm not sure.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate it. Yeah,
I'm not for sure. It's from Saxon. It might have been Saxon. I can't remember. It is like one of the smaller stories, but like I said, this is a dragon, like similar to Beowulf, But they added this sidekick character, basically, It overcomes his, weakness and.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. And what? So, just trying to think back at kind of some of the literature in terms of like shared mythological beings. I'm curious. There's a huge overlap between the mythological beings of the English and of the Norse. I mean, you have elves, you have dwarves, you have gnomes, you have the
we don't have gnomes.
Don't gnomes? I thought we had gnomes.
Swedes have gnomes. We don't.
Well, okay. Well, I'm a Swede, so I have gnomes.
I think.
I'm part Swede.
Do the English have gnomes?
I thought they did. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe that's just a Swedish thing. Yeah. I wish. Man, I'd have to. We'll have to bring Nathan back on and ask him to get our comparison of what mythological creatures we have. But the Celts have like their whole other collection of mythical creatures. I mean, some of them are kind of similar, like the Kelpie. There's something that's kind of like that. This other horse creature in Germanic folklore.
We have that as well. It's called the Nekur. It's an Icelandic mythological creature. It's exactly the same as the Neg. I think it's named the same as a Celtic. It's a water horse that drowns you if you mount it.
Yeah. I mean, where do you think... I mean, maybe I'm going with too much of the materialist view of like, oh, where does that come from? Did that come from people falling off their horses and drowning? I don't know, maybe there were magical magical horses back then. Who knows?
The quote unquote some experts or something say that it is might have originated from some water, horse sacrificing rituals to appease some lake gods or something. I don't know, like local deities. That's one theory, and like the creatures have spun from that mythology basically. That's like one take, but I am not sure. We have no idea about those traditions.
I remember a lecture by Tom Shippey he has on YouTube where he talks about how for the Norse, when they were being Christianized, a huge concern that they had was, what about the salvation of all the other folk, the sort of mythical creatures? Like, what is their fate? Can they receive salvation? Because they very much, believed in them as having this tangible reality. It's a lot of times we look back on that stuff and think of it purely as allegorical or purely as just the sort of literary phenomenon. And maybe some people of the time didn't believe in their tangible reality, but I think
they all, but literally, I'm pretty sure, like
I would say, the vast majority, if not all, people back then.
It was just like a part of everyday reality. The gods, the elves, and these creatures were like just a part of nature, like the animals. This is the true, quote unquote pagan view. It's just fauna basically, but it extends into another realm or a supernatural reality that you cannot see. Some unseen realm basically. So there's actually an interesting story because these myths about the elves and the trolls, they were kind of integrated into Christian mythology later. For example, nobody knows exactly what the elves were. There's like a theory. We all have these stereotypes like pointy ears or whatever, but they're not described that intricately in detail. Like we have contradictions in descriptions. We have many different names, but the commonality is that they are always hidden. They're unseen. They're not seen by normal people unless they want to be seen, and they have they seem to occupy the same space as we do, but it's like kind of like in another dimension. For example, you get let into their world, and all of a sudden an elven city appears where it wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like kind of like a mystical reality that they occupy, like unseen. The hidden city, a hidden people. That's kind of their thing basically. And
I think people crave living in a world like that, where there are these things that are, in this sort of mystical realm that interacts with our own, where there are these kind of.
They're also like magical. They can do magic, and they can curse people, and there's stories like they can sometimes steal children, and you have to appease them basically and not piss them off. But where they came from, like they could have been ancestors, they could have been something else. Like there's a world in Snorri called Alfheimar, the home of the elves, but it's not described basically that much. But it's like a higher realm than Midgard. So, but yeah, I was saying that the myths that were integrated, their origin was actually the elves were integrated into Christian mythology. For example, their origin was explained by the church later, the medieval church, by, for example, they were the first children, like they were the siblings of, their ancestors were the siblings of Adam and Eve, and one day in Eden they were like, all of them were dirty, and there's this might have been before Adam and Eve were born. No, sorry, before Cain was born.
Because you do have references in Genesis to there being,
yeah, they were integrated into Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so they're not siblings. They were the sons and daughters, sorry, of Adam and Eve, and they were their children, and they were like, I think they were like their first children or something, and one day, like, they were all, God wanted to see the children, like look upon them, and those children that were dirty, they didn't have time to wash them, so they hid them, and God said, I know you have hidden these children from me. How dare you do such thing? Like, let them be hidden from everyone forever. So that's how you get the hidden people, or the elves. That's how you explain the curse from God, basically. So that's one.
That's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, that's how, like, a good example of how these myths were integrated into Christian canon, and also like the trolls are they become these monsters, basically. They're like, I think, connected to demons and hell, and they run away whenever church bell are rang or something. They do not go near, churches, basically, holy sites. And there was actually, I really read, like, in the 1600s or something, like, people were actually like scared of trolls here. Like, they were scared to travel because they were afraid that trolls were like lurking in the highlands, basically.
And
like,
just imagine how terrifying. I mean, not just like going out into the forest, but sea travel. For instance, like if you are sailing to Iceland, or you're sailing, around the North Sea or the Baltic, it's terrifying enough now knowing what's there, even if there aren't some of these same like sea creatures. But in the past, it's like there's no limit to what could be there. I guess today you could say there still might be these sea creatures. We haven't really explored all that much of the ocean, but I mean, back the problem kind of with technics and with the sort of technology that maps the entire world and maps just all of human knowledge is that it does suck away the mystery and sucks away a lot of the terror too. The sort of the terrifying creatures that could exist on the frontier, those are kind of stripped away, which takes away a lot of the magic. And I mean, it's just a totally different world to live in when you don't know what's out there.
Yeah. But something like the elves are like, they are not meant to be discovered because they can't. They're like literally hidden.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot be seen or discovered. So they are like occupied this everlasting mystical, that's their. They cannot be explained by techniques, basically. They literally occupy an unseen realm. And I would argue that their metaphysics is like remarkably similar to, for example, like the jinn in like Middle Eastern mythology. They seem to be like really similar entities. So you have this like convergent evolution of ideas, basically, of similar entities and similar concepts, like these hidden spiritual entities with magical powers, They're usually like bound to a particular area. Like for example, there's a theory that like elves are like bound into stones. Basically, they are living stones. if it's a big rock, big enough to house like a few people, it's called an Álfasteinn or elf rock.
Oh,
It's like a
interesting.
theory, like elves live there. And
And elves got incorporated into names as well. So like Alfred, I believe means elf council. And there's like some like elf friend and several other
also
names.
Álfhildur is a name in Icelandic. You also have like a name, it's called Álfur, literally means elf, you know.
Oh yeah. And
like,
I mean, and isn't it the case too that there was the belief that humans, like through greatness, could even ascend to becoming elves?
well, that was like not good in like after Christianization. That was viewed as like a curse, like you would come live with the elves. That's a bad thing, you know. you don't want to
No,
do
don't
that.
take me to the elves. To Alfheim, no.
Because there's
Going away to
Icelandic
Brazil.
folk song. It's called Ólafur Liljurós. But the song itself is one of the oldest, like Germanic folk songs in Europe, I think. The tune. But it's really old. But the text itself differs from like country. It's different in Denmark than in Iceland and Norway and whatever. I think Denmark has like a pre-Christian version of it, where some guy goes into the woods and dances with an elf maiden and in a circle or something, and then they disappear. I can't remember what exactly the plot there is, but in the Icelandic, the lyrics were composed clearly after Christianization. So you have this, this writer named Ólafur. Obviously, probably supposed to be Saint Olaf or something, So he's writing and he meets an elf queen in the middle of the road, and the elf queen like tempts him to abandon Christ and live with the elves, and he says, fuck no, go away. I would rather, believe in Christ than live with you lot. And then he, approaches him and stabs him in the side with a poisoned knife, and he, falls off his horse and dies. That's basically the song, the poem.
Wow. I'm unfortunately gonna have to cut it off here. I've got a event I've got to get to. But
yeah, so we have four viewers, I think. It's
4 views. Nice. Well, wow, you stuck with us for a 3-hour live stream. Much respect. Yeah, we'll have to save the elf stuff for going further into that in one of our later streams. I mean, the fun thing about this is as we're talking through stuff, like we keep kind of bouncing on more ideas, which kind of spiral off into different subtopics. But hey, I just want to give a huge thanks to Fjolnir for being on the stream and for contributing so much. Do you have anything you want to shield, Fjolnir?
No, I'm nothing to shield. I'm just an elf myself. I will remain hidden forever. Only
elf stream when?
Only to be called upon when needed for some lore, mostly
Fantastic.
Icelandic lore.
The keeper of Icelandic lore. Well,
yeah,
respect you for your service. But yeah, anyway, thanks so much for sticking around, guys. Drop a comment with what you guys think. Helps the algo, helps me. And remember, new video coming out very soon. If you're watching this stream later, it might already be out on Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and Christianization. So stay tuned. Hey, thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you. Takk fyrir.